Today is December 9th, 2024, and we are in the newly and beautifully renovated DeLand house. We have as our guest this morning an interviewee, Ann Dean, longtime resident of DeLand. This is for the West Volusia Historical Society, and we thank you very much, Ann, for participating in the recording of history in DeLand, and this will go into an archive and will also be shown on YouTube. So thank you very much for giving us your time.
Absolutely.
We're going to start out by talking about your early life. Tell us where you were born and raised and your family life.
Well, I was born in Piketon, Ohio, which the name Piketon comes from Zebulon Pike, who went through little old Piketon, Ohio, on the trek to the northwest. And I grew up in Piketon, and then from there I went off to college in Colorado, got married, and we moved back to Ohio, and then ultimately to Texas, where my husband had a job, and then got divorced and came to DeLand to work for a physician. I'm a nurse, and so I worked with him and got very involved in ambulatory surgery. And now I have a company with my daughter, and we work with physicians who are interested in building their own surgery center where a patient can come in, have surgery, and leave the very same day.
Wow, that's quite a trajectory.
Yes.
You summed that up very well. And going back to your childhood, what are some of your earliest memories of growing up in Ohio?
Well, I think probably it was at the end of World War II, and I can remember my grandparents talking about the Germans, and my father was in the war, and as little children we played war, and because that's what we heard, and I can remember being terrified of the war, and that the Germans were going to come and get me as a little girl. And so that was very formative in my early life and growing up. And then, of course, later on, we had the Cold War, and so we practiced jumping under our desks, if everybody remember, and protecting ourselves that way. Piketon was is a very small town. At that time, it was like maybe 2,000 people. Nobody ever had any idea where the key to their house was. And it was a lovely place to grow up, very idyllic. Kids skated down the streets. You know, nobody was concerned about cars or getting stolen or kidnapped or anything like that. It was just a very idyllic way of growing up. And then the Atomic Energy Commission named Piketon as one of the 3 sites for their U-232 extraction. And so the big government came into Piketon, and overnight we grew to something like 30,000 people. That was very, very interesting because we didn't have running water up until the time the Atomic Energy Commission came in. So we got sewage and water, and the telephone came into our little town and all that kind of stuff. And
how old were you then?
I was 53, so I was about 10. About 10.
So you were aware of what of the changes going on around you?
Very much so, especially with the Atomic Energy Commission, because they fenced in the entire plot of land where they were extracting the U-232. And
what is U-232?
Uranium. The problem was that they were dumping the byproducts of the uranium into our creeks and lakes and things. So even today, all these years later, they can extrapolate uranium from our creeks and our fish and things like that. So you weren't allowed near the atomic energy plant. If you got so close to the gates, they came and turned you away. So it was all very secret. And one of the things that was kind of interesting was that they portrayed it to be a very safe kind of thing. And in fact, when the Atomic Energy Commission was developed, and this was published in the USA Today, the newspaper, And what they did is they were looking for small towns with not very educated people because they didn't know what the byproducts were going to be and the ultimate damage it might be. So they wanted to have people who weren't going to raise a ruckus. And it was when the Freedom of Information Act went into effect, they published this in USA Today. And it talked about how Piketon and Oak Ridge and one other place, I can't remember right now, how they selected those places because they didn't know what the end results were going to be. And the cancer rate, unfortunately, in southern Ohio is just off the charts. So we were aware peripherally of all this happening. And then the plant closed down, essentially. So it was very impactful, definitely.
And people locally went along with it they were pretty ignorant of potential harm.
Right.
And so there were no objections raised.
Peripherally, the farmers said their cow's milk wasn't the same. And so there were things like that. And people periodically got sick. And so there was some, because not everybody was not college educated or, poorly educated. And so there was a lot of concern and things like that, but it was quelched right off by the government, of course. And it was everything was top secret. So it was kind of an interesting time to grow up and kind of a scary time at the same time. Coming from World War II and then all the way through all this Cold War stuff that went on.
But in spite of that, you have some pleasant memories of growing up there?
Oh, absolutely. It was the best place in the world to grow up. We had ice cream parlors. The ice truck came once a week when I was a little girl, and the kids would all run all over town. We lived in the country, and Mom would bring us in on Saturday, for example, to do business because she owned real estate and stuff. And she'd just turn us loose and we'd run all over town, and then when it was lunchtime, we'd run back to home, eat, and then run back out to play. And it was just really, really lovely. It was a lovely time to grow up. Like I said, the ice truck would come and we'd all be lined up next to Black's Cafe to get our chips of ice, and the iceman would chip off the ice for us and, let us each have a big chunk of ice to suck on in the summer. So it was great.
Simple pleasures.
It was simple and very much like a TV show or something like Hardy or something like that. Yeah, it was great.
So when you came to DeLand, you told me earlier that you came in 1983.
Correct.
Was anything here reminiscent of that?
Very much so, the trees. Having left Ohio and gone to Texas, where we didn't really have all the same vegetation, of course, but the big trees. And so when I came here, it reminded me of some of the college towns in Ohio, where I grew up. And we lost a lot of our trees in a big hurricane, Francis, I think it was, but we still have a lot of beautiful, beautiful trees.
Here in DeLand?
Here in DeLand, and that was the thing that really called me.
The trees?
The trees, yeah.
Let's talk about your career and your education leading to that career.
Mm-hmm.
What made you go into the field of nursing?
Well, I started out as an art major because I have talent in that area, and I really loved it. And I had the opportunity to be an intern to the art teacher at the local high school in Waverly, Ohio. And I realized I did not want to teach art. And living in a little town, a little community, what are you going to do with an art degree other than teach? So my daughter had a accident where she fell from a tree and fractured her kidney. And so we were very involved at the hospital while she was recovering and all that. And I got interested again in nursing. And when I was a little girl, I wanted to be a nurse, like a lot of little girls want to be. And but I was not really great with science. So my mom felt that we should really foster the growing up and with the talents that God gave us. So that's why I went into art. But then when my daughter was hurt and we were at the hospital all the time, So I got interested again, so I became a pink lady. And the local surgeon who was taking care of my daughter, discovered that I was interested in nursing, and he kind of fostered me and encouraged me and said, yes, you can do it, you absolutely can do it. So I went into nursing, and I've been in nursing now since 1974, I believe it was, when I graduated with an associate degree in nursing, and then later I went back and got a baccalaureate degree in nursing from the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio. And I ultimately became an OR supervisor at the teaching hospital there. And
would you explain that job?
The OR
to make
supervisor?
It clear to our listeners.
Well, if anybody ever watches TV and which story? What is it? Netflix. They have a series on there called The Residents, and I've just been glued to it because it's all about the operating room and these interns and residents and all this kind of thing. And since I was involved with the Bexar County Hospital, we were working with the interns and the residents because that was a teaching hospital. So I really enjoyed watching that series because it brings back all the things that I was involved in. The operating room supervisor is a rather prestigious job because your job is to get the schedule done for the day safely and soundly, and that everything goes smoothly. That's the job. And it was when I was at Bexar County Hospital, I worked first of all in the recovery room. And one of the things that I saw was that we took care of a lot of young women who were coming in for surgery, female surgery specifically. And the problem was that we had no privacy to discuss their health care needs. So what I saw over there, we had these 2 private rooms that the HUD housing afforded us. And we used those for patients who had infections, for example, or they were dignitaries or something like that, but otherwise they sat just empty. And so I remember looking at those 2 rooms one day after I had just given care instructions to a young woman, and the gentleman was laying right beside her on his stretcher and listening to everything, and I was embarrassed. I was like, this isn't good, And so I saw those 2 rooms sitting over there, and I thought to myself that would be perfect for my awake alert patients, my female patients especially. So I went to the director of nursing, and she gave me those 2 rooms to use. So I put a lounge chair in there, and I brought the care person, because one of the things we do is we say after you've had surgery, don't sign a legal document for at least several hours. Because we've altered your normal state of being with our drugs and things. And then I would have them, I'd read their post-op instructions, and then I'd hand it to them and say, okay, sign here. But they've been altered chemically, and so that wasn't really meeting the code. And so I set those 2 rooms up to be outpatient recovery rooms. And then I went to the operating room as the OR supervisor, and I saw that what was happening was those same patients were lined up down the hall with no privacy at all, and that wasn't working either. And what would frequently happen is that we'd just schedule the patient in wherever we could get her. So maybe we snuck the patient in room 1. And then maybe the next patient got bumped and they were now in room 10, like that. And that didn't have continuity, it didn't support the patient. So I took these, so what I saw was that there was this one room that was the observation room where a resident or an intern or another physician could go in and watch the surgery. It had a big glass window into the operating room where we did our open heart patients. But it was being used for storage of equipment. So I went back to the director of nursing, and I said, I want that room, and that's going to be our outpatient room. So that was my first real experience with the operating room and taking care of the patient. So it really worked beautifully. They weren't getting bumped from the schedule anymore after waiting for hours to get in anyway. And so in the meantime, then I got divorced. And I had a salesman came to talk to me about equipment, supplies and stuff. And I was commiserating on how hard it was to be a single mom and all that stuff. And he says, why don't you go across the street to Methodist Hospital and apply for the job of ambulatory surgery director? And I was like, whoa, well, that would be nice. That'd be an increase in salary, help me raise my kids. But on the other hand, I'd only been a nurse for 5 years. And I thought, there's no way they'd give me a directorship in 5 years, you know. But I went over to interview at Methodist Hospital in San Antonio, and I talked to them. And by the time I left, I had the job. So it was really, really exciting, because nobody knew really what this thing called ambulatory surgery was really. You know, we were stumbling and bumbling and trying to make sense of it. We knew that it was an awesome possibility. There were only 200 in the United States at that time, and no rules and regulations, but we knew they were coming. So it was like being on the frontier of a new thing.
So you were a pioneer.
I was a pioneer. Fortunately, I was on the right place at the right time, which is one of the few things that we get to say that we were. But I did, and I sat on committees, federal committees, and I spoke at national meetings and things like that. And I can remember one meeting I spoke about was the American Hospital Association meeting. Well, the hospitals didn't want these things called ambulatory surgery centers, because your ambulatory surgery, what am I trying to say? Your ambulatory surgery procedures are kind of bread and butter. You know, it doesn't cost a lot of money to do them. You don't have that many supplies to do them because they're very simple. And so they bread and butter cases, and we were taking those cases out of the hospital now. And rightfully so, because ambulatory surgery patients have a different set of skills that we need as nurses to take care of them, because in the hospital at that time, it was unheard of for the operating room nurse to go up to the, we call them up to the floor, but up to the surgical floors to talk to the patients preoperatively. We just didn't. We went behind the double doors in the OR, and we stayed there, and it was all mysterious and all this kind of stuff, you know. But in ambulatory surgery, what we knew was that we had very little time to spend with our patient, but we had to get all the data. We had to make sure that they understood everything that was going to happen, and that they were comfortable, and they had the knowledge now to make decisions and to give consent.
So this was kind of revolutionary.
It was. It definitely was. And so it was exciting, though, to bring and we had to teach them the nurses how to interview a patient, because they had no exposure. You bring the patient into the operating room, give them some yummy gas, and they're asleep, and you do the procedure, and hasta la vista, baby, you know. So anyway, but with ambulatory, we knew that they were part of the team. In fact, not just part of the team, but they were actually the captain of the ship. In the hospital, the surgeon is the captain of the ship. I mean, he's doing open heart surgery and brain surgery and all this kind of stuff. Well, we're doing breast biopsies and bunions like that. But we knew that there was a lot of need for what it was that we were doing. Patients could come in. The average patient was there for 3 hours. We started on time, we finished on time. There wasn't any of this delayed cases because some gigantic, horrific automobile accident happened and took away the operating rooms from us. So it was, yes, it was a very exciting time, and it was revolutionary. Hospitals did not like us. We took all that money away from them. But the concept was that the thing is that the hospitals were experts in health care from a acute care status. We were experts in ambulatory. Patients are in and out, and average 3 hours spent at the surgery center. And then the nurses called the patients preoperatively and had that conversation, which in the hospital, they were not trained to do that. And then after surgery, the nurses called the patient again to see how they were doing. And again, not something that's done at the hospital level.
Just to be clear, these ambulatory operations were separate from the hospital?
Sometimes the hospital developed their own ambulatory surgery center. Sometimes they squeezed the patient in between inpatients, as we say. The physicians got right on the bandwagon, though, and saw an opportunity to return the control of the patient to the physician. Because actually, when the patient comes to the hospital, the physician has no control over the patient. The physician is now required to follow all the rules and regulations of the hospital. And if the hospital says you have to be there for 2 hours before surgery, we didn't want to really have them there 2 hours before surgery, because what we knew is that we could have them ready and into the OR within 30 minutes to an hour at the max. So, but once the doctor had the patient admitted to the hospital, he lost total control, and it became whatever the hospital rules and regulations were. So they wanted to have something that was far more efficient for the patient, for the doctor, and for everybody. So that was kind of big impetus. The hospitals felt that it was going to be a fad, that this would pass, and they asked me to speak at the American Hospital Association on this ambulatory surgery wave, and that what they were wanting was for me to tell them that this was just a fad, and it was going to go away, so all they had to do was take a deep breath and hang in there, and it'd be gone. But now there are 9,000 surgery centers in the United States.
When you came to DeLand in 1983, you brought this expertise with you.
Yes.
Did your work continue in developing these things here? What was the status quo here when you came?
When I came to work for ophthalmologist, Dr. Alfred Newman, here in town. And there was one surgery center here in DeLand, his surgery center. There was another ophthalmology surgery center in Orlando. So they were springing up. You know, remember I said there were 200 in the country. So they were springing up, largely pushed by the ophthalmologists, because cataract surgery, you know, is in and out, no pain, no pain, but lots of gain. And so because you had all these ophthalmologists pushing for it, and new techniques and new equipment, new supplies, new instrumentation, new anesthesia agents were developed so that the patient wasn't so drugged up and doped up, because it's just minor surgery. And so so they were springing up all over the country by then, and it's been a rapidly moving effort on the part of the physicians. The physicians have pushed this very hard. Interestingly enough, Medicare took a long time to get them to approve this. An example would be that if you had surgery at a hospital for cataract surgery, the Medicare would reimburse you about $3,500. But in our ambulatory surgery centers, we got reimbursed $350. So that has taken a long, long time to level that playing field. And we still aren't there, but we're getting there.
You and your daughter have a company that works precisely on this, right?
Yes, we do. Yes, we work with physicians who want to build their own ambulatory surgery center. And the hospitals really touted that they were money-hungry mongrels. And everybody wants to earn a living, and maybe more than just earn a living, live well. But the fact of the matter was, again, the doctors weren't doing this for the money. They were doing this for returning the patient to their care, their rules and regulations. And we helped write the Florida regulations for ambulatory surgery. We sat on that committee, my daughter and I. And so we wanted to have something that really worked for the patient, and bring them in, do the surgery, send them home, follow up with them. And what we found was that they did so much better in that environment. They had much less exposure to infections, for example, because they're there a short period of time. Hospital infection rates were considerably higher than our ambulatory surgery center, and still are. It has to do with exposure. You know, if you're not in that room with that patient who has some god-awful going on, you know. And I can remember when I was an OR supervisor, we had a patient who was very sick, and she was in the area of pre-op, right next to an otherwise healthy person. But now her exposure is high to having an infection. And we don't have that in surgery centers because we don't operate on infected patients. And if we have to operate on an infected patient, we do that patient the last day of the day, the last patient of the day, so they don't have any exposure to otherwise healthy patients.
So, let's talk now about your involvement with the Historical Society. What got you interested in history here, local history?
Well, I always loved history. Growing up in Piketon, Ohio with my mother loved old things and history, and you know, I live in an old house like this, and with all family antiques and the family, the furniture, but also I have my grandmother, my great-grandmother, who I never knew. I have her china, and I have her birthing bed. My great-grandfather bought a specific bed that has storks on it for her to have my grandfather, for example. And so I just grew up around history. That's the way it was, you know. And I think coming in from World War II and then the Korean War, there was a lot of out with the old, in with the new. And so when I was growing up, my mother was very involved in preserving what was old and making sure that as little was torn down as possible. And so that was just part of our living. It was how we lived. You know, we lived in an old farmhouse out in the country, and to protect what was there. I came to DeLand, and I wanted to make a difference. And I wanted also to meet people because I, new face on the block. And so I got involved and I sat on the Historic Preservation Board. And
For the city?
For the city. There are two old buildings downtown. So the city on that committee had proposed that we tear those buildings down for parking spaces. And I can remember pulling myself up to my 4'11" height and saying, "Over my dead body," you know, that they would tear that down for a few puny parking spaces, excuse me. And so they're still there. They're housing some very nice, lovely restaurants and entertainment centers and things like that.
This is Artisan Alley.
Artisan Alley, yes.
So you saved the buildings.
Loudly enforced, yeah.
That became eventually Artisan Alley.
Yes, it did. And it's quite a nice commercial area. Brings a lot of visitors to our town. And my grandchildren go there, and so do I. Frequent.
You must be very proud.
I am. Well, I'm proud, but I'm also encouraged because I have seen areas where the old post office is. There was a beautiful mansion there, and it got torn down. So I'm up to preserving what's old, and if not preserving, then repurposing whatever we can so that we have that for generations to come. And I think that's our hope, is that people see what was there before, see what was old, and that doesn't have to be torn down to be repurposed to something that's useful to the community.
Can you give us some examples of some old buildings that have been successfully repurposed here in DeLand?
Well, yes, on New York Avenue, some of those beautiful mansions on New York Avenue. There's a law office in one, but they're all repurposed, and that's encouraging. I think having different people like Mark Shuttleworth involved helps initiate and then supports the building or the protection of those old homes.
And what Mark Shuttleworth is, for future reference, people seeing this in the future, can you say what a difference he has made as an individual, as a businessman, right?
Well, I think one of the things that's really neat, because I frequent his shop, is that he'll take a house that's going to be torn down, and he'll save everything that he can possibly save out of it: the woodwork, the baseboard, cupboards, cabinets, everything that he can possibly save out of there. He'll save it and repurpose it. I have a lot of things. I live in a house that was built in 1883, and even before Henry, it was one of the oldest houses in town. And I've got a lot of stuff from Mark Shuttleworth in there to put in a little corner sink and things like that. So I think that, and people go in, they see that it's like this house. They can see that this is how people lived then, because history repeats itself. And it's like something to be proud of, our little town here, and our furniture that we have in this house and like that. And I have it in my home. My granddaughter is 22 now, just graduated from college, and she came back from High Point University, and now she's living at home with all these old antiques, you know, the Westlake chairs.
What does she
and
think
stuff.
about them?
Well, some things she wants to pitch in the trash, and Grandma has a little hissy fit. And other things she treasures. So,
because I hear a lot of people saying that young people nowadays want everything new. They're not interested in old furniture or family heirloom pieces even.
well, I wasn't. You know, I can remember as a young bride, my mother gave me a desk that had been my great aunt's, and I was kind of snooty, you know, and so I took the little thing on the front of the cupboard. I don't know. Anyway, on the front of the desk kind of thing, I took that off because I didn't really appreciate what it was that I had. I have it back now, and I'm restoring it. But I do see that. I do see, well, it's old, or well, it's got some mildew on it, and I'm like, try some bleach, you know, like that. We don't have to throw everything in the trash.
So you had a stint as president of the West Volusia Historical Society. Anything memorable from that period of time that you recall?
Well, the biggest thing was the extent of their involvement in the community. You know, Bill Dreggers wore the Henry DeLand suit. Janet Bullam dressed as Helen DeLand. So whenever there was a festival or anything special going on downtown, then they would dress and come down and mingle with people. So people kind of started seeing this history coming alive. And I think that made a big difference with young people especially. And so that's one of my commitments, is that they understand that this is your great-grandmother Mabel, and this is her bed, or this is her china, and this is how they did, and this is how they used that. And so, you know, with my grandchildren, that's how I did it this morning, talking to Savannah, because I have two Christmas ornaments. One was in my mother's house on their tree when she was a little girl, which is a long time ago, and the other one was on the tree at my house when I was growing up. And her reaction was that, well, they're not going on the tree, but put them in a bowl or something like that where they're safe. So, so I gave her a little story about them, and you know, like that. And she's like, "Yes, I know, Nana. Yes, I know."
So, what do you see are the challenges then in getting a preservation ethic continuing?
I think and I think this is one of the reasons that Artisan Alley is good, because the thing that you said, that they, and like I said, I understand the mentality. You know, they want new and modern. And understood, but that doesn't mean that you throw it out and throw it away. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is that mentality. And some of that may be just because they're starting out in life and they want new things with this new world that they're entering into as young adults, and like that. That's my hope. It's
an emotional attachment.
Yes, it is. We're now working to, how do I say this, get rid of some of the stuff that we've collected over the years. In our own home, we're purging, you know, and it's amazing what we hoard. And I'm more than happy not to be a hoarder. However, there are things that I will absolutely demand that we have. And it's an interesting experience with your younger family. But I think it's really, really important, very important.
What are some of the changes that you've seen since you've lived here at DeLand since '83?
I think that there is more of an interest in the older things now than there definitely was when I first came on board. I sat on the Main Street Committee, and we worked on the brick road, for example. Identified what road we were going to have be the brick road. And so that was from the Athens Theater out to the courthouse. And that was good. Young people saw that now the streets were sometimes brick, like that. And the Athens Theater, how busy the Athens Theater is, and the young people are going to the Athens Theater, the concerts downtown. So I think that even though the young people want to give me the new, I think that there is, just by how busy our downtown is, and I had to do a deposition for a lawyer from Ocala a few months ago, and he said he loves doing depositions in DeLand because it's the busiest small town that he's ever seen, and he loves to come and see all the people downtown, and I do too. I mean, it's awesome, it really is awesome.
It is kind of unique, isn't it? And
it is.
There's still shoe shops and barber shops and things in the main street.
Absolutely. And Indian cuisine and Thai cuisine, and it's really bringing history to the masses, kind of thing.
So what do you see as your legacy here?
Well, I think my biggest legacy is my house. When I came to DeLand, they had the realtor meet me and to take me around and look at houses. And I told him, I said, I don't want anything that was built after 1920. I might look at a 1930 house, but really I want as old as possible. Because when I was growing up, we always went to my great-grandfather's house for dinners, and especially holiday dinners. And I have a picture in my mind of my great-aunt Florence standing on a ladder decorating the 10-foot tree in the parlor. Never opened that parlor door. Once a year that parlor door got opened, and I was a little girl, and I was like mouth hanging open looking at these statues that my great-grandmother had, Elizabeth. And so my mother would tell me about Elizabeth, my great-grandmother, and that I have her flow blue china. And I have dinner on the table that my great-grandfather, Albert Wynn, bought for Elizabeth for a wedding gift. And I have the bed that my grandfather was born in. And so I think that growing up with that image, especially of the Christmas dinners and things like that, was extremely impactful. So when I came here and I said I want as old as possible, then he pulled into the driveway of 911 East Minnesota Avenue, and I looked at it and I said, well, if it's structurally sound, I'll take it.
Just from the curb? From the curb.
And he said, well, don't you want to go inside? And I said, well, of course I'll go inside, but I'm buying this house. This house is my house. And it happens to be a Queen Anne vernacular. And she's beautiful. She's teal with kind of a maroon accent and white. And she's happy and loved to have a family there. And I told people, I said, you walk in the front door and you feel this energy. And I used to walk in the front door and go, hello, house, I'm home. And you could just feel the energy in the house. So she's happy. She's got family now. She was built by a couple from Louisville, Kentucky. And it was part of the grant that the governor gave for coming down and starting an industry like orange groves. And if they were successful, then they got a deed to it. So there used to be I don't know what they call the orange plantation kind of area, but that's what she was. She was an big orange grove, 166 acres, I think, was the original. And then during the Korean War, they sold off all the acreage except 2, which is what I own.
You mentioned a daughter. Do you have other children?
I do. I have a son who is a mechanical engineer, retired in Colorado. My daughter Heather lives in Washington State, and she's a retired engineer also. Worked in the reclaiming the wetlands. That was her specialty. And then my daughter Stephanie and I worked together and lived together.
And she lives here
yeah.
In the Queen Anne house with
Yes,
you.
she does.
And how do your other children feel about historical things? Do they come here to visit? Do they appreciate it?
My older daughter definitely does. Her house is full of antiques, and she's very interested in that. And when we visit, we frequently go look at old homes and things like that. My son, not so much. His wife is not that interested in old things. I think he has a interest, but I don't know, not like what we have.
So, do you have any words of wisdom to pass along?
If you're going to buy an old home, you got to have a lot of patience. I'm very impatient. So it's like we're in the process now of, well, I tell people we raised 4 children and 4 dogs in that house because I moved my daughter into that house because I wanted my grandchildren to have what I had, running in and out of Grandma and Grandpa's house. And so I was successful. I succeeded with that. And they all want to have the house in the family forever and ever. And so what we're doing now is we're restoring the inside from those 4 children and 4 dogs. And in the meantime, we have things like the main sewer line breaks, you know, so can't buy that new furnace today, you know, like, so you just have to be patient and set your priorities. And do research so that you know what it is that you're buying or not buying or what you want to buy and how that would fit in and stuff. And one of the things we talked about earlier was we need to install a new furnace and air conditioner. And how do I do that in this old home? And I was sharing with Mary Lou that they want $20,000 for the air conditioning just for the first floor. And I'm like, this is crazy. I'm not going to do that. So we're going to go with the splitter. And I'm comfortable with that because it's taken a lot of research. I want to be historic accurate, but I also know that we have to have heating and air conditioning. And so I think we're going to go with the splits. And I've looked at a lot of other historic homes, and they have the splits. So I figured they must know what's good or not. And the Lakeside Inn in Mount Dora, for example, has splits.
Is there any kind of federal or state funds that can help people who are preserving old homes?
I've looked and looked and looked because it's a private home, and I've not been able to find anything. They talk about utilities, but you have to be like low income and et cetera, like that. So we haven't qualified for any of those assistance programs. It's been more bite the bullet and sock it away until you can.
Maybe that's the next area of revolutionary change.
That would be awesome, wouldn't it? Yeah, that would be awesome. We used to get a lot of people stopping at the door, knocking at the door. My great aunt lived here. Could I come in and look? Sure. You know, or I used to visit my grandmother. She lived here, like that. The house has been owned by just 4 people, 4 families. And what was interesting on the second floor, and we have 10-foot ceilings on the second floor, which is a little unusual too. But the door into one of the bedrooms had this big slash down the door. So in our reclamation, we puttied it in, sanded it off and everything. It's nice and smooth. And then I got out the deed and I was reading the deed, and what it was that one of the recipients of the house after the father left, the patriarch left, died, was this young man who was in the Louisville Institution for the Criminally Insane. He had attacked his sister, and that slash on the door was with the axe. Yeah, so I'm sorry that I filled it in, but...
Or maybe not.
Yeah, and we do have a ghost. She's not been around for a while. But when my granddaughter was a baby, she used to talk about the lady all the time. The lady says this, the lady says that. And I had different friends and some business associates who stayed at the house. And I had one doctor, ophthalmologist, came down in the morning, and he said, Ann, he said, I really appreciate your hospitality. It's been wonderful. But there was a lady who came to visit me in the night, and I cannot stay here. So, yeah.
Does she have a name?
I don't know. I don't know.
You've seen her.
I've had an experience with her. I came up to the second floor and was walking down the hall towards the back of the house, which was all glass. It was a sleeping porch. And all of a sudden the TV, which I used that space for a family room, the TV came on just booming, just huge booming. And there was nobody there, but the TV came on. And then I had another friend and her daughter who stayed there, and they very much are into ghosts and things, so she came down and told me that the woman had visited her too. I think she wanted family, and so she got family, for better or worse. She has family. So nobody has seen or talked to her for several years now. But yes, we have her.
Very interesting. Advice that you would give a young person today?
Well, there are some, on Clara Avenue, there are some houses there that are owned by young people. And that's encouraging. It's really, really encouraging. I think that the more we do things like that in the town itself, the festivals and all those things, I think the better chance that we have of imparting our knowledge and our love. And I think that is going to make a difference. My legacy is my home and all the belongings inside, and any difference that I can make in the community. You know, I'm active in the Historical Society, and I think that's going to make a difference too.
And that's how you'd like to be remembered?
Yes, yes, definitely.